the Holistic Podcast, your source of health, happiness, and harmony. And today I have the honor and the pleasure to speak with Bogdan Kadziola, with an original background in Tai Chi and different form of therapies, that he been paired with Oriental Philosophy and created the core and resource-oriented body and psychotherapy. Hi Bogdan, how are you today?
Hi Georgiana, I'm very good, thank you.
Nice to speak with you. So I would love to hear a little bit more about what different form of therapies you studied or practiced. So a little bit more insight in your background and how all this led you to creating a new form of therapy.
The basic thing I started with was with regular physical massages that led me into acupressure, into zone therapy, into emotional release therapy, because I discovered very early, in my very early 20s, when I was massaging people, it had significant emotional reactions from them. And then I realized that the tensions in the body must have an emotional basis or must be emotionally related. So I started studying this. And then with some friends, we started studying Gestalt therapy. We went into Alexander Lowens, who was with his bioenergetics, which was a huge thing coming up in Denmark at the time. And then at that time also I met Bodynamic Institute, which is body-oriented psychotherapy. But should we say the next generation, because originally you have Freud, you have Reich, you have then Lowens, and then came the group with Bodynamic Institute and Lisbeth Marker, which was sort of, you can say, the entire next generation that grew out of that tradition of psychotherapy. So that is where I took my original education and eventually educated with the diploma from Bodynamic Institute.
But you also mentioned Oriental philosophy. What made you interested in those, and how did you combine the two? Because I am also interested in the Oriental tradition, and from my perspective, combining some of the Western aspects and the Oriental tradition, I think it's a very happy marriage.
It is an extraordinary marriage. It's an extraordinary marriage. I absolutely agree. Well, I started out with Tai Chi. I was actually a totally dedicated sportsman at the time, and then my brother came and told me about Tai Chi. I didn't know what it was, but everything inside of me exploded with, that's what I'm gonna do. That's what I'm gonna do. And I was a tough sportsman at the time. I was totally into elite sports. And then from one moment to another, when I heard that word the first time, I knew that's what I'm gonna do, and I was prepared to drop it. And I had to go, and I actually moved in with a very exceptional practitioner in Christiania in Copenhagen, of all places. He invited me to stay with him, and over the summer I stayed with him in a house he borrowed there, and we practiced, and I learned about Tai Chi, and that became my life for the next, and profession even for the next many years.
It's for me it sounds very, very interesting, from an elite sportsman to psychotherapy. How come that you combine the two?
Because the jump is even much bigger.
Okay.
Because at the time, I had started a study in law school at university. And I was actually to become a lawyer, and I was also to become a diplomat. That was the idea. I was on my way to the foreign ministry. I spent a year working in the economy ministry, which I do not wish to repeat. But then a lot of other things came by. At that time, I met yoga. I met specifically a yoga system from South India, which was very powerful. I met meditation. I studied since a lot of years. I studied yoga, meditation, Tibetan, Tibetan Buddhism and Tibetan Tantric Yoga. I studied North Indian Tantra, I studied Kashmir Shaivism, which is, you can say for me today, one of the main inspirators for how to pair the Western knowledge with the Oriental knowledge.
What exactly in the Kashmir Shaivism led you to the therapy that you are practicing today, or what was it in it that you paired it with the Western?
Well, I will start the notion from the Western therapy, because the therapy, the background I have in the therapy where I made, should we say, where I had my specialty, was related with development psychology, the understanding of how the human being is developing, all the way from fetus and up, and specifically pre and perinatal therapy, which was something I enjoyed very much. And then this whole understanding of the development of the human being, which is, I find extraordinarily important and essential the way I work. And I've been doing that now for 30 years. And then I went very much into trauma, deep trauma, post-traumatic stress disorder. So I work with people who had died, come back, women who have been multiple raped, and all kind of, you can say the worst part of the garbage bin. I worked with this, which led me very deep into a search for what is a human being. Because when you go to this rock bottom with people, where there's almost nothing left. I mean, somebody who is treated like some of my clients have been treated, it's almost like there's there's only one core left, because they're stripped of everything, because it's so inhuman.
It's amazing to be able to help people that went through all that.
Yeah, I found it a blessing, and therefore it was my idea for. I worked with it really for 30 years, and then I thought, pardon me, I thought that I would make an early retirement with the therapy after 30 years. But then I realized, together with the Shaivism, which was your question from before, that is, there came a notion for me, which has to do with, as much as the Western therapy that I learned from Bodynamic Institute, which is the most brilliant, in detail understanding of how a human being develops from a fetus up to a grown-up human being and into adulthood. Then that paired with the Kashmir Shaivism understanding of what is a human being in essence, and what does it mean to be a human being from a whole standpoint. Because when you look at Western therapy, what we're extremely good at is pulling things apart and understanding the details, but we define the human being according to our problems. When you look at Freud's typologies, which continued into the understanding alone and further developed by Lisbeth Marker, you have all these typologies, personality typologies, because the human being as a child, we develop in themes. We learn first we learn to exist, existential structure we call it. So how does it mean to exist in the world? And you experience as a newborn baby, how am I? How is it? Am I welcomed into the world, or is the world a very hostile place to be in? And so on. It forms our entire perspective, our entire view upon existing in the world as such. You see, and so on, and therefore we develop in themes. The next theme is needs. How are our needs met? Is there enough for me? Does my mother have enough to feed me? Does she want to feed me? Does she have a rejection of feeding me? Does the world want to feed me? Is there nourishment for me in the world, or should I give it up or fight for it? And so on. All this is built up in themes. The amazing thing about Kashmir Shaivism is it describes the development of consciousness in 36 steps, or you can say according to the phonemes of the Sanskrit alphabet in 50 steps. So it's exactly the same type of model, but where the Western model, just like, for example, also the Enneagram, which came originally from Gurdjieff and developed by the South American psychologist, it describes again the human being according to our struggle back towards ourselves, but according to what went wrong in our childhood. And that's how psychotherapy defines our structure, how we look at people, we have problems. And the big turning point for me is that Shaivism defines us not according to our problems, but according to our completeness.
Which is, from my perspective, the best view upon life and existence to have. Because if you are focused on problems, you will always have problems because it's the only thing you see.
Yeah, it's by what you can say, by resonance, whatever you focus upon, how you see the world, that's how the world is for you. That's the world you create. But you have to have both, because when people come to a therapist, they don't come because, yeah, I'm complete, I'm wonderful, my life fantastic. Can I pay you a small fortune to talk an hour or two with you every week? No, nobody's going to do that.
Yeah.
Very few people will do it.
Absolutely true.
Very few people will do it. So we define ourselves, and we come because they're trouble. You don't go to the dentist and say, yeah, I'm fine, I have no problem. You go to the dentist usually because, well, you know, I have a pain or I have a problem there. Can you please help me? Because I really don't like you, or what you do, because it hurts, but I have to do it. So this is how we define ourselves. We are often motivated by pain, by fears, and that's a great thing. As the Tibetan Buddhist says, there are two paths forward: the path of pain and the path of wisdom. And for some reason, most people choose the path of pain. It seems to be popular.
So if we move a little bit into the kind of therapy that you do now, could you please be so kind and explain to all of us who are watching, what do you exactly do and what is the base of it? What is the structure? What are the pillars of it, and why it is different from other therapies? Yeah.
See, what I use is the synthesis of all this knowledge of understanding and defining from what people have been through, and this huge toolbox, how one can help it. But the difference is where people, what I see with therapy and modern medicine for that sake, is that mostly we are fixers, we are mechanics. Psychomechanics, body mechanics, whatever mechanics. We're fixing something that's wrong. People come, please make this go away. My perspective changed dramatically at a point where I realized, in order for people to become complete, there cannot be, we have to take the basis I'm trying to say a lot of things at the same time, because a lot of things happen at a point that gave this, so let me structure it in a better way. I came from a lot of work with the trauma, with the deep trauma. And one of the problems with deep trauma is that it's a place where we have very little left sometimes. And if you push people, for example, in shock trauma, if you push people into the shock and you just go there, which would be the normal thing to do in therapy, I'll go back to the thing and relive it again, what happened. You create a shock of the second degree. Shock of the third degree creates cancer. So if you keep pushing the patient or client into the shock they experience, they're going to die from cancer at some point, because the whole structure is fighting back, because in the core of every shock is a big black hole, where there's no memory, there's no realization of what happened there. All that's left are the feelings. We have two glands in the brain. One of them remembers what happened, and one remembers all the emotionals. And the part of you, the brain that remembers what happens, is short circuit during trauma, this kind of trauma. So there's no memory. There's just all the feelings, which creates an immense chaos in the life of such a person. And then I start extrapolating that work in a certain sense, of all the therapy I do, what I realized was that in order to help people faster through it, I started working from, not from the whole, from the problem, but I started working with the basis in resource. You understand? In order for, let's put it like this. If you look at your worst day, nothing works. At your best day, you can fight anything, right?
Exactly.
It's a principle. So what I do is I take the basis in the resource, and in physiotherapy, I think they call it energy overflow as a technique. They use it in physiotherapy. A colleague of mine told this because I tried to present it at a point, and my peers say, no, it's just a person-specific thing with that client. And someone said, no, actually in physiotherapy, we have exactly that technique. So I further developed it. And there is a point in Kashmir Shaivism, for example, where it's pointed out that in a specific part of the teaching, that at a certain level of consciousness, you can dissolve all the traumas, dissolve.
But
That is why.
this it's something which is absolutely amazing to be able to achieve. Just dissolve all your traumas, because
Yeah.
Not all of us have deep trauma, but to a certain degree, we all went through suffering. We all went through heartbreaks. We all went through something which
Exactly.
maybe we'll not call it a trauma. I'm not a psychologist, so I don't know if I use the right term, but to a certain degree, we are all a little bit damaged here and there. So
Yeah.
to be able to just take that away for good and not have to go through it to remove it, I think it's brilliant.
To take it away is not what we do. That's the thing. We don't take anything away.
Okay.
That's the beauty of it. That's the beauty of it, because when you take away your mechanic, you take this thing out, you put something new in, right? That's the mechanic approach. And I did that for very, very many years, almost 30 years before I discovered that was not the way forward. No, less than that, but still a lot of years. But what this is, that at a certain point of consciousness, all these things start healing. And I worked with this for myself, and that point relates with what we call the soul. The soul is a positive definition of what the human being is. So what the shift in the therapy, from my standpoint, was a shift away from seeing people as a series of problems that I can be the hero and help them with and whatnot. Many therapies are so happy. We're very happy to help people. It's a wonderful feeling to do it. But to shift from, I am trying to help people with removing a problem, to start defining what is really a human being. Because in most therapy, the definition is negative, it's from our problems, right? So you don't have a definition of what is a whole human being. Bodynamic is the closest I get to it, but there's still something which was missing for me. And that was the understanding of, we have an ego, and usually therapy is one more evolved, one more trained ego is trying to guide another ego. Einstein said at a point, you cannot solve the problem from the same level as where the problem is. So my shift at a point was to move away from trying to be a more evolved, a little bit more trained in whatever ego, helping another more damaged ego than myself to see and solve their problems, to try to focus from the standpoint of the soul. Now we have a point where the definition of what is a human being and what is therapy absolutely changed for me. Because now I'm not looking at problems, I'm looking at the soul. And then the point which I was, when I was preparing a bit for this today in my mind last night, or early this morning, I made a little bit of a definition of it, which I like very much, because from the standpoint of Kashmir Shaivism, we come, as we also say in Christianity, Christianity is said, we are made in the image of God. How can the image of God be flawed? We cannot, right? So something in the whole notion is absolutely nonsense, that we are made in the image of God and we come here and we're all these terrible little flawed beings, and with a bit of luck, something good might happen in our life. It's a horrific standpoint. It's a no-win situation. But if, like Kashmir Shaivism, instead, we start understanding, essentially, we are the soul. We don't, people say, I'm looking for my soul. That doesn't work either, because you never find it. Because you're it. You're it. You're that. And what I'm trying to use in the therapy is a perspective where it's the soul that does not understand itself yet. And that's a significantly different standpoint than, oh, I come here, I'm a flawed being, and one day I maybe become whole. If all these broken pieces become, if I find a person that can help me put these broken pieces together, then maybe I can become a complete vase or piece of china, whatever again. But you're already complete. That's a very essential perspective I take from Kashmir Shaivism.
But it is also in the same time a huge shift of perspective, because nobody teaches us that we are complete as we are, or that we are souls having a physical body for a while.
It's
and
true.
It's we are so indoctrinated with what a human being is. Now I'm really curious, how do you manage helping people shift their perspective, because it's a huge shift.
It's a tremendous shift. What I would say was that the difference it made with my clients was that I suddenly saw miraculous healings. I saw miraculous changes. People start changing. Even after one session, their life was different. People came back and said, my God, my life totally changed after even the first meeting, where I thought, whoa, something here is right. Where I know of people who spend years or in decades in therapy and with very little improvement, because they say, oh, but there's so deep damage. Where I say, well, it's the wrong perspective, the wrong starting point. If we are looking at it, we will, as you talked about in the beginning, we'll increase that resonance, and we can, as a therapy and client, spend a whole lifetime together about these damages and look around them, and we think we're doing a great job, but we might not be very efficient. So how is this shift, how is the shift done? The shift is done from the understanding of a human being as a soul, essentially even you can say in Shaivism as self, which is a more evolved. But let's start from the soul, because that is useful in therapy. Self is not so useful. So from the standpoint that you're a soul, what is a soul? I call it this little quantified piece of infinitude of the divine light that exists within you, that is the one looking at me now, the one that can be aware of yourself. The ego is not aware of itself. It defines itself in little pieces, and by analysis, by breaking up. The soul can only be experienced as a whole.
How do you explain this to an atheist when you will say divine light? Probably they will react to the expression.
I only explain this to my clients when they start talking about their own experiences with it, because it comes naturally. The thing is, I mean, the most relevant question in it from that standpoint, at least as I see it, is if we are that complete soul, if I'm right, if Shaivism, if yoga, if all these Oriental philosophies, they're right, that we essentially this divine self. How can we lie puking in the gutter and think of ourselves as miserable beings and act like complete idiots? How is it possible? It is possible because in order to exist in the world, to manifest something, let's say you have a piece of clay. That clay has infinite possibilities. The moment you want to create something, let's say it's a sculpture of a person or a vase or a tray or a cup or something out of that piece of clay, all these infinite possibilities, they boil down to one. There's now only one possibility, and every time you create, it boils down to one possibility only. And it's the same thing for each one of us. There exists only one Georgiana in the world, and there exists only one Bogdan Kadziola in the world. Thank God, I hope so. Most of us wouldn't really like to meet ourselves.
This gives an extraordinary possibility, because we start from the thought that we have an infinite possibility. Yes. Then if the adults will be completely aware of it, or at least aware of it, not completely, let's put it aware of it, then they will be able to educate their kids from the start with this perspective.
Oh, they would be able to educate themselves from that perspective, first of all.
Of course, but also they will be
What
able
the parents and the kids change? I can tell you this. Every therapist knows that. If there's a problem with the kids, you start taking the parents in therapy. They change, the kids follow.
Definitely.
But it's true, you can raise your kid with an absolutely different perspective upon themselves in the world. We need this perspective now. The point is that since in order to create us, we are now boiled down to this one option, to this one perspective. Astrology explains it. Well, there are these 360 degrees in the zodiac. And at one point, Georgiana came in, and then we make a horoscope, and then we look and say, well, in this life, that was your starting perspective. That's where you came in. That would be esoteric astrology. Will say, well, all these infinite possibilities boiled down to this one person with this horoscope sign, with this typology, with this or that. So because of it, we define ourselves as limited beings in the sense of separation. And that is where I take my point in the therapy. The reason why we do not have the connection to the soul is because we, she would say, suffer from separation, division, which is a prerequisite for us to exist in the world. That is the separation. There's somebody there sitting that I'm looking at now who's Georgiana, and then there's Bogdan here, far away, who are two significantly different persons. And yet, from the standpoint of the soul, we can experience ourselves as exquisitely similar and even have the sense of uniting and feeling one, like we can do, for example, with our lovers for at least certain very privileged moments. And if the perspective is instead is really trying to overcome these ideas of separation, because that's a real trauma of the human being. From the standpoint of Shaivism, they would call it the divine sacrifice of sacrificing the total, complete unity, oneness, in order to experience diversity. And mankind, very immature as many of us are, got stuck in this idea of the separation. And our primary separation is separation from us. And that is my starting point. That is, when somebody's in front of me, is how can I help? Where do I start helping that person to unite with themselves?
This is, I believe it's one of the most efficient paths you can start helping another human being. Yeah. Because as you mentioned a little bit earlier, of course you can be a brilliant therapist, it doesn't matter what type of, but you make people dependent on you. So from my perspective is the best solution is to help people do the work by themselves with a little bit of assistance from you, so they are not dependent on you. Well, but how do you manage to not convince, but how do you manage to help another human being who is so convinced that is limited, have all these type of problems, cannot work them by themselves? How do you help them really have this shift from I'm limited, I'm helpless, I have all these problems, I have all these flaws, to realizing I'm a soul, I am complete, and not only that, I'm also united with everybody else on this planet.
Oh, you want all my secrets now. A long time ago, I had by accident some realizations.
I don't believe in accidents, but go ahead.
By accident in the same, it was absolutely unprepared for, and it was absolutely unexpected. It was at a point of extreme exhaustion, and from my own point, and where in order to be present, I just centered in my soul very strongly, so I could just be there with the person. And I realized that the more I was there with them, the more things start getting right inside them. So one of the things that, for example, creates the creation or separation from the beginning is we have parents that are not united with themselves. They are in deep crisis of separation themselves. So we grow up in an environment where this is normal. And when they're not able to be with themselves fully, how can they be with us fully? In other words, they say they love us and all that, but much of the time, they're maybe not completely with themselves. They're not completely with us. And we simply grow up in an environment that feels a bit hostile, or even the best possible environment is still from a certain standpoint of separation. Spoiled children, for example, become very selfish, right?
This is huge, because if I understand it correctly, then you are the catalyst, because you have to be united with yourself. Otherwise the process will not start. So actually you have a huge responsibility, because every time you have a client, you have to be united with yourself.
You have to be united with yourself. This is the training I will do with the therapist I will train. That is the first thing I wish to teach them. That is how they unite with themselves and how they use that in the therapy. Because it's the first thing. It's one of the genius things I learned from Bodynamic Institute and Elizabeth Marker, who put this amazing system together together with a group of people. She brought together a group of top people, really, really wonderful therapists, and they created this system called Bodynamic, that today is still Bodynamic International now, but and now led by her daughter. You have to remember this education I took 30 years ago. Every one of us started getting a little older. But one of the things I learned from them, which is so wonderful, was that as a therapist, not because the psychiatry, for example, had this idea that there's the client there and you're the therapist, psychiatrist there, and they're lying on the couch and you're not interfering with their therapy. And what they say is the same as quantum physics says. You can't even look at a thing without changing both you and what you're looking at. And the knowledge in the whole universe changes by you looking at something. So that's a huge thing. So maybe it's one of the few therapies, the first one really taking the consequence of the fact that we can't look at a thing, we cannot interfere with a thing, or be with a thing looking at it without interfering with it. And what I learned from my training in Bodynamic was, since you cannot not interfere with it, learn to control how you interfere with it and use it for the therapy.
I'm still, my mind is still on this aspect. If when you do the therapy or when you do any type of training or coaching, if you are the catalyst and you are the catalyst, you and you are united with yourself, so you have to be not just be very knowledgeable about it and know the theory. You have to already obtain the results that you want your client or the people you work with to achieve, because otherwise it is not working. And just as a funny parenthesis, for example, in my home country, there are a lot of jokes about doctors and physicians, and especially about those working within the psychiatry and psychiatry departments. And they said that always the main doctor in the psychiatry department has all kinds of psychiatric problems.
Yeah.
So how can you cure somebody else if you're not healthy on that level? But this is a little bit unusual for the Western world, that you have to have already the results you want your client to achieve.
At least you have to be quite a bit on the way. That is very correct. You have to be quite a bit on the way, and that is maybe why it took me almost a lifetime of work to get to this understanding myself. Because it's a recent thing, and my biggest problem, which is what you're pointing out, is exactly also when I was thinking that I would love to educate some people in using this, because people ask me. Some people looked at what I was doing and they say, well, I see what you're doing, and what I see you do does not correspond to the results. These results are tremendously beyond what I see you do. How do you do that? I want to learn that. So by being pushed by people like this, at a point when I thought I would maybe have a soft retirement, I have been thinking about how to teach this for people, and it was my biggest headache. That is, how am I going to bring people from A, where they are at the moment, to B, where they need to be in order to perform such a therapy. Because of course I can also teach them all the knowledge I have about the therapy I'm doing and all this. But as you correctly point out, it is the therapist that's the catalyst in the system, and therefore in the therapy system I'm developing now and hope to teach to people to do, the therapist needs a significant amount of development and understanding of themselves. Not understanding from mental understanding, but from a direct first-hand experience. If you have not been in the garbage bin, you can't go in there with people. You see that? This was maybe my main requisite. That was, I spent a lot of years myself in therapy too, but I didn't all the time just see it as because I was such a traumatized person. It was also because I saw that it as a way to spiritual development. And at the point, my therapist told me, well, if you want to continue, if you want to develop beyond the problems you've been working with me till now, you need to find yourself a spiritual teacher, somebody, a spiritual master of some kind. And I was happy enough to find a lot of guidance in the world.
But it is
so
now I can see the connection with Oriental philosophy and Oriental traditions, because that when you want to learn something, you need to find a spiritual master who already went all the way, or at least a huge part of it, so they have personal experience, so that they can teach you. Is not a theory that you are relying on in a spiritual master, is their personal experience. So somehow is the same that you do with your therapy.
Exactly the same I do. When people come to me, the first thing I tell them is, I'm not gonna fix your problems. I'm not a pill. And this was one thing very important that I learned from Tai Chi and from the Taoist philosophy. The whole universe is in a constant evolution, in constant development. And one position is not important, the next position not important. Important is how do you get from A to B? How do you make that movement? That's the essence. And I practiced at the time 6-8 hours a day to integrate that system in my body, and it's still there, even though I don't practice so much today. But that is what I tell my clients, that this is going to be a process, and I'm going to walk it with you as long as you wish. We're going to walk that hand in hand, but
you're not going to do the work for them, because you will cripple them.
And not only that, it will not work. It will not work. You can't do it for them. I know a lot of therapists try to do it, people who really want to do good, but who have this obsession of fixing other people. I'm sorry, some people out there might be very upset with me about this, but a lot of us feel, but it feels good. We want to help people, and it's a good feeling. Oh, I helped somebody and I saved some people, person today. I mean, I had people who came to me and said, well, if you can't help me, I'll kill myself. I didn't like that. But that's when you have suicidal clients. You're the last resort, and often they have been everywhere else, and you're the last thing. So that's not a good situation. But what I usually tell people is, I can walk it with you, and sometimes I can carry them a bit, but I can't do it for them, because it is them. And this, you can say from this standpoint, what I try to do with the therapy is to change the awareness from therapy being someplace where you go to get your problems fixed, to somewhere where you go and have an evolution for yourself. That it becomes your evolution, it becomes a kind of path for you to transform yourself into a more complete being or complete understanding of yourself, if that makes sense.
Makes total sense, because from my background and what I am teaching, this is the most efficient and also the healthiest approach to no matter what type of problem we are confronted with. It's not me fixing somebody else's problems, or me having somebody fix my problems. It's if I am in the role of a teacher or a coach, is me through my life experience be able to put a light on the other one's problems so they can have a better understanding and also some tools to work with themselves. Otherwise, it's from a certain point of view, like with medicines. More, a certain category of people, they like quick fixes. They just to pay some money and have a quick fix and no effort from their part. But it doesn't work. It doesn't work like that.
No, but it works very well hand in hand in the sense that people like to have an apparent quick fix, and the pharmaceutical industry is very happy to present them with a quick fix. The problem is the quick fix often becomes a lifelong dependency. It becomes a lifelong customer.
And not only that, it's only fixing the symptoms, it's not fixing the cause. Yeah, because if that will fix the cause, you will not get the problem ever again.
It's so smart. It's like you're a mechanic and everything you do makes the problem bigger. So people keep coming back, having more and more expensive repairs. I mean, from a standpoint of economy, it can't get any better. But from the standpoint of helping people, it doesn't get any worse. It's correct. This is the sad reality of it.
It's the first time ever, because I'm also interested in psychology and neuroscience and quantum physics and everything that can help me, but also the people that I work with transform and evolve a little bit quicker. It's the first time when I hear about any type of psychotherapy that has your perspective.
Yeah. What I will, maybe I throw in a little more of something, I don't know if one can call it a bomb, but what I discovered at a point then in this research with the clients was that I found that many of the major diseases, they have a fingerprint, they have a psychological fingerprint or footprint. In other words, people with cancer, there are certain things they psychologically have in common that seems to be what creates cancer. People with Alzheimer's or no, I didn't work with Alzheimer's, Parkinson's disease, they have a very, very particular trademark that seems to be common for them as at the understanding of a basic structure, because that is what both Bodynamic and what Kashmir Shaivism boils down to. That's understanding the basic structure. When you understand the basic structure, the rest is just, let's call it the decorations of life, which can take many, many, many different forms. But if you look at the basic structure, it doesn't matter how you decorate the Christmas tree. You can still see the tree in behind. You still know what the structure is. You still know the stuff is hanging on branches and what the branches are. So in that sense, you can recognize it and you can actually help people with severe diseases. I had very wonderful results, for example, with Parkinson's, where shakings disappear very, very rapidly.
This means that you can help people understand the cause of their problems so that they can remove the cause.
Yeah.
And this is actually giving back to people the understanding, but also the know-how of the fact that if they have the power to make themselves sick, they have the power to heal themselves.
Yeah, and often there's nothing to heal, because the moment they discover that notion of separation they're living, when they're looking at themselves and say, my God, I can't be in a relationship because I never really engaged in the relationship. Many people, for example, come, which I noticed where I live now, that for a lot of people, for example, the women, they have the same tendency, a lot of them. That is, they don't marry the guy in front of them. They marry an idea about somebody they want, but he's not really the guy in front of them. And they don't understand why the relationship is a disaster, and then he shows up to be a jerk or whatever else. What did they expect? They didn't marry the guy in front of them. They don't relate to him. And the guy, he basically is scared of his freedom, so he sort of goes into it, but he still has one foot out. I remember this Robbie Williams in one of his songs, I think it's called Feel, where he's saying, whenever I enter a relationship, I already have got one foot out. because we are so scared of going in, because we don't know who we are. We are scared of losing a freedom. We are scared of, well, we're scared of losing a freedom that we don't understand and that we never really had. But we just think that it's going to disappear. But we go there for some reason. And it's a disaster. It's often two people who don't understand themselves, who then try to marry a projection on each other's, which is another separation. Often we marry the opposite sex parent in our own vision, our own perfect vision in our head. And of course, that's such a dichotomy and creates so much pain between people who don't understand why they're fighting.
It's difficult to have a relationship with 6 people involved. You, the other one, your mental image of you, your mental image of the other one, and exactly the same for the other person. So a relationship in 6 is not exactly easy to manage.
No, it's terrible, because especially if you don't know all of them are there and you don't realize that you're shifting between them. It's a terrible situation, and especially also when you don't understand that your primary drive really is the drive of unity, that you have the drive to become one, and most of the things you do in your life separate you. It's a terrible, should we say, drama of mankind, of the human being, that is our profound separation from ourselves and from everything around us. And that is what allows us to do even horrific things or painful things and whatnot. And yeah, the human being, when, I mean, I see this with people right now. A lot of people now in this COVID times had a lot of time for themselves. And a lot of people I talked to stopped, and then they looked at their lives for the first time. And they come to me and say, my God, I never looked at my life like this. I'm running around like a crazy, trying to serve all kind of things, totally split in all kind of different persons. One person at work, one other person at home, third one with my friends and whatnot. And there's essentially really no time for me. And now I had time to sit at home and find out, think about, how did this happen? How did I end up here? Is this at all the life I want? And that's brilliant. It's a brilliant effect of it. A lot of people stop for a moment and sort of united with themselves for at least short moments. And that changes everything. And when you as a therapist can be there as a catalyst for people to unite with themselves, because that's my perspective always. That is how can we unite. And it also helps when you can really be there. That in itself is very healing for the person. Because your first, most primordial trauma, what is that? The first really big trauma any human being has is the separation from your mother, right? You're born and you were one, and it was nice in there, it was warm, it was pleasant, you were safe. And suddenly you're out in this terrible world where you're, for the first time, separate from all of that. You can't hear your mother's breathing and heartbeat and all of this. And everything seems very scary because you're separate for the first time. And from there on, what is actually happening to the human being, in order to us to form as complete human beings, we walk the first years of our life as a separation from our mother and our mother's energy, with which we were totally united at first. And that separation is often a very traumatic separation that follows our whole life, because it doesn't really happen optimally for almost anybody, right? But the birth in itself is an immense separation. And if you think about our soul's separation in a certain sense from its origin, is a kind of primordial trauma, in a sense that we are here as individualized beings, and that's how we define ourselves. Me, different from anyone else. And the moment things can start connecting, being together inside. It is one of the first things almost all of my clients tell me very quickly, is they start suddenly because I have some techniques, things I do with them to help them discover it without mentioning it all. And the first things people experience is themselves. And they feel, wow, I feel this state of peace. I feel safe. I feel good. and that are the first reactions of people connecting to themselves. And I don't need to talk about God. I don't need to talk about soul and self and complex Oriental philosophies and all of that, because the whole therapy is built entirely on people's first-hand experience of themselves.
That's brilliant, and I really hope that you will teach other people, other therapists, this new approach, because it is holistic, and it goes to the core of things, and is actually helping people much better than any other type of therapy that I know of. I thank you so much for your time and for the insights, and I really hope that you will do that you will teach other people how to do it. I would like to know, if people want to find you and work with you, how can they do that?
They can write me on my email, which is my name, Bogdan Kadziola @yahoo.com, or they can find me on Facebook. I am on Facebook under my name.
All right. I will put the links in our video so that it will go straight to your email and your Facebook account. Thank you so much, Bogdan, for today.
Thank you so much for this chance to share this knowledge.
I really believe that it is very valuable, and I wish you great success with it. And I really hope that a lot of people will want to work with you.
Subscribe and get access to all the training videos, those already published and the ones on their way. I wish you a wonderful day.